But we've got to talk coaching moves early on here in the show, D. A lot of stuff happened over the weekend when we weren't able to record. Of course, Jim Knowles headed from Ohio State to Penn State. Tom Allen leaving Penn State a few weeks ago. And people were wondering, what are they going to do? How are they going to replace him? Tom Allen headed to Clemson. And boy, did they make a splash.
Yeah, it's that if you look at this, the Penn State defensive coordinators going back a few years, I mean, it is name brand after name brand, whether it's Brent Pry, Manny Diaz, move on to now Tom Allen, who then goes to Clemson, replace him with Knowles. So they've had some of the biggest names in the industry at defensive coordinator. And look, if you're Penn State, you know one thing for sure, and that is that James Franklin is going to recruit the absolute best defensive talent around. Got just look at the NFL Combine, look at the NFL Draft. It is freak after freak. The strength and conditioning program at Penn State is second to none. So, these are all, of course, big name defensive coordinators on their own. But when you combine that with the talent that they get through the Penn State machine of talent acquisition, development, strength and conditioning, you get perennial top 10 defenses. I expect that to continue with Jim Knowles. Of course, you got a ton of talent moving on. Abdul Carter, others, but you bring back Zane Durant, deny Dennis Sutton. You got guys, Rojas, and you're going to continue to recruit and develop that level of player. So I think from a, Jim Knowles standpoint, if you're getting a significant pay raise, he's a Philadelphia native, not that close to Happy Valley, but close enough. And that the talent is going to be coming steadily. You got proof of concept from the last three guys. Safe, smart decision if you want to get paid and if you're leaving the reigning national champion, which itself is a pretty unusual move.
And this leaves us to the next thing, which is, of course, what's next for Ohio State. Look, we saw the report last week where Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, potentially we're looking at the transfer portal. Carnell Tate, it's been announced that he's coming back. Jeremiah Smith has tweeted that he has, that it looks like he's staying. Right, at least for the time being. But when you're the champ, people are gonna come at you and come for your best assets. That's exactly what happened here with Penn State, doing just that. So how does Ryan Day reload here in terms of the defensive coordinator search? I'm sure it's going to be a highly coveted position, but some names have already emerged for that spot.
Yeah, just in general, when you're Ohio State, you're in that category with Georgia, Alabama. We'll throw Texas into the mix now, where you expect, because of the level of recruiting, the talent to reload. Now, there's a lot of talent walking out the door, particularly in the front seven. But you got some good news. You got Sonny Styles back. You got Igbinosun back. So you got some very good players coming back. And, of course, Caleb Downs, you can safely project him as probably the best defensive player in the country for 2025, or, right there in the conversation. That's a nice nucleus to start. You'll get a lot of young talent. The question now is, do you go with continuity, or do you go and get a big name? So some of the names to keep an eye on, that names that have been discussed publicly, Matt Guerrieri, who is considered by many the leading internal candidate to replace Knowles. Just reading the quote from Ryan Day talking about him. One of the brightest minds in college football, and I'm telling you, a star in the making. Only 35 years old, so he's a young buck. He's from Ohio originally, played at Davidson, spent 10 years at Duke, analyst with Ohio State for a year in 2022, so he knows that Knowles defense, then calls Indiana's defense for a year, comes back to Ohio State last year as a safeties coach. So the familiarity with the defense is there. Being with Knowles 2 out of those 3 years, he does have experience as a play caller on defense, although it's not like Indiana was setting the world on fire in 2023, but this is a 35-year-old with a lot of upside. So you're combining kind of the upside plus the familiarity and the continuity effect. I could see the fit. Again, you look at what happened at Duke when he was there in Indiana, these were not elite defenses. So that's going to be the negative. But at least what you're getting from a personal standpoint because he's been in the building.
Then, as we keep things moving, obviously he would be an intriguing option because he understands the system. He has familiarity with the players, familiarity with the program. He knows what the expectations are, having been there, having won the championship. But, of course, there is also the option to go outside of the program and pluck someone from another big time program. And a name that's been popping up here is Chris Hampton from Oregon.
Yeah, originally from the South. You'll play to South Carolina, then goes out with Dan Lanning to Oregon, leaving Tulane. Well, first of all, he's at the defensive coordinator at Tulane for 2 years. And that was when they beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. That was when Tulane was really, really rolling. Then goes out there with Dan Lanning. He was 247's number one recruiter in the class of 2025 as far as assistant coaches. You look at the precedent. Ohio State got their running back coach from Oregon, their biggest Big Ten rival. It sounds so weird to say that, but obviously it's a fact. Their biggest Big Ten rival right now in terms of, where the two programs are. I guess you have to throw Michigan in the mix, and it's their biggest rival in truth. But, Oregon and Ohio State right now, that's kind of the power clash in the Big Ten. So they went and got Carlos Loughlin from Oregon before. He's their running back coach. Maybe go back and get Chris Hampton. You look at his history. He was at Arkansas State. He was at Georgia Tech, Central Arkansas, McNeese State, again, all around the South and the Southeast before getting to Tulane, where he had that standout performance as a DC. He's learning under one of the best in Dan Lanning. He knows the conference. You could see that one as another one where with upside, with some familiarity, although it's not as much familiarity with the scheme he just had, as compared to like a Guerrieri who was here in the building. So similar kind of riser, a little more experience as a play caller and success as a play caller, but less familiarity with the personnel in the building and the scheme in the building.
And then the next name here, Tim Walton, a guy who has a ton of experience in coaching, has been in the NFL for a while, was at Ohio State, since 2022. But this is a guy who's really seen everything in terms of the NFL game, the collegiate game, and has experience calling defenses as well.
And we know that Ryan Day likes NFL guys. I mean, look what he just did with Chip Kelly and the success that he's had with him. Of course, Chip Kelly now rumored potentially for the Texans job. We'll see how that develops. But Ryan Day likes the NFL. Tim Walton had 11 seasons in the NFL before going to Ohio State in 2022. Before that was a college coach, though. We saw him here at University of Miami. Always been more of a defensive backs type coach, but does have experience as a play caller, call plays on defense in the NFL for Jeff Fisher, also at Miami and at Memphis. So he's been around, he's called plays, he has experience. He's another one who's familiar with the scheme, with the personnel. He's been in the building as Ohio State secondary coach, but maybe less had the theoretical upside of a Guerrieri who's a younger individual. Walton, he's been around. So that to me is an interesting fit. We got a question here from Arab. Any chance that Walton comes back to the U? That to me would be more of a lateral move. I think if this guy goes anywhere, he's going to want to be a defensive coordinator calling plays or a head coach, because if you're the secondary coach for Ohio State, you're going to be coaching first rounders year in and year out, and you're going to be feeling pretty good about it. So those are some names that just make sense. It's going to come down to what does Ryan Day value? The upside, the familiarity with personnel, the familiarity with scheme, familiarity with the conference, or does he just go totally off the board like he did with Chip Kelly and get someone that no one really expects to come in the program?
Well, and we're talking about these guys who are on staff, such as Guerrieri, Walton, and you assume that they stay because they have had such a big impact and they're being even talked about in this job, right? But you bring in a different coordinator that comes from the outside and they have their own people they want to bring with them at a certain spot. I'm sure there will be holdover, whoever comes in, but it just makes you wonder. We're talking about kind of the dominoes that are falling here and what openings are still out there, what openings are still becoming available. And I think these sort of things are interesting to keep an eye on as we see who takes this Ohio State job.
Yeah, one more name I should mention that's been discussed, Phil Parker, Iowa's defensive coordinator, another Big Ten guy, totally different than Guerrieri as far as being, a young guy with upside. This is somebody who's been around the block, 14 years as a DC, 13 years coaching defensive backs at Iowa. And Iowa's become not only a consistently great defense and defensive program, they've become a DB factory. You look at some of the Big Ten DBs of the year since 2012, Cooper DeJean, who we just saw here in the NFC Championship game, Riley Moss, Amani Hooker, Josh Jackson, Desmond King. Micah Hyde, Stone from Baltimore is not even on that list, but he's another really, really good player. So Phil Parker has turned Iowa, which is not in the middle of a DB hotbed, right, from a high school personnel standpoint, into a DB hotbed. So that speaks to his evaluation skills, his ability to develop guys. If you're at Ohio State, you know that the talent's going to be coming in there, particularly at that position. He's going to do a great job there. But also, as far as coordinating an entire defense that plays with physicality and discipline, he's done that at Iowa consistently, knows the conference. I think if you're trying to win the championship next year, or if you're Ohio State, you're not trying to build too far in the future. You're always going to try to be a national championship contender. You always want to beat Michigan. Parker's a great choice.